Thank you very much, and this is really a blast to be able to actually speak here in Indianapolis, and particularly to such a prestigious group. And I have known Barbara Weaver-Smith for quite a few years, and I'm going to tell a little story about her a little bit later in one of my stories. And, you know, I really didn't realize I was catching whales. I don't even know how to swim. I just learned how to swim actually this last year. This was one of my, I guess, before bucket list came out, but one of those things that was on my list that I needed to do. In fact, another athlete told me that if you conquer your fears, if your fear of something, and most people perceive as a race car driver that I fear nothing, but I fear many things, just like all of us do. But the one thing I had a definite fear of was water. And unfortunately, we weren't able to show the video that shows my very first race ever in my life, legitimate race. On a racetrack, I drove a Ford Pinto into a lake, and the car submerged, disappeared, and I was not. I mean, I was afraid of failure, but I was probably more afraid of drowning, because I had this fear that if I got in the water that I would drown. I really didn't care at that point about the car that much. By the time I got to shore, and they said it looked like I walked on water because I opened the door and just hustled out of there. By the time I got to shore, the car had totally submerged, so it disappeared. And I remember standing there thinking, and the race was still going on, you know, cars are still going around, and I'm standing there, and there's no car. And I remember thinking, oh, God, if Scotty could just beam me out of here, it's like this didn't happen, you know, because the evidence was gone. I was the only thing left. So my fear of drowning, and then at the end of the day, the entertainment of the evening was to go down and watch the divers pull the Pinto out. And I remember standing there with a T-shirt and shorts like everybody else watching that go on, and the guy next to me goes, so who's driving that car? And I said, I don't know. Didn't have my race suit, didn't have my name on it anymore, so I could beg out. But anyway, so that was in 1974 when I first started racing. And it wasn't until last year that I actually learned how to swim. And it's very difficult as an adult to find somebody that will teach an adult how to swim. Kids do that. So, but this athlete had told me that if you can overcome something that you fear, that you will find the power that you've realized by overcoming that, the power will then emulate into everything else you do. And of course, immediately I went, if I learn how to swim, I can drive faster. I would be at 226 miles an hour like Scott Dixon rather than 225. But anyway, I didn't get it in until last year, which of course now that I'm retired from active racing, it isn't helping me drive faster. But it has turned into being a very powerful thing for me. So we all fear something, and for me it was the fear of the water. But then I read, you know, Barbara told me about this book that she'd come out with, and I'm whale hunting, you gotta, what, you know. So I started to read it, and I mean, I wanted to go to Alaska and get on that boat, you know, and because I think it's the metaphors in it are fabulous. And I realized, not immediately, but certainly after some reading it and conversation with Barbara, that I have caught some whales myself, and not just by myself, because there has always been a team. So what I would like to do is share with you 4 whale hunting stories. 4 whales that I have caught in my career that enabled me to get where I have gotten in racing. They all have relation to racing, so and try to at least not assume that you're going to maybe capture those lessons from those, because each one, even though they were similar, each one really taught me a different lesson about what it takes to be a whale hunter or to do with the big deal. For me, and for any of us in racing, I mean, I think, you know, listening to Brooke's story about how we can be comfortable at what we're doing and you know, and get in comfort. In fact, in racing, they say, you know, if you haven't crashed and you're not going fast enough, so we always have to go past it. I mean, in our world, driving 10/10ths is like as fast as the car will go, right? So that's 100%. Well, in the competitive world, of any competitive world, somebody else is going to figure out how to go faster or do something a little better. And so in qualifying, we call you go 11/10ths. So that's just 110%. And hope you don't crash. And essentially what happens when you pull that off, so there's that desire to go, you know, not be comfortable, go out of your comfort zone and not crash. And that becomes your new 10/10ths is all that happens. So it's a continuous process. So no matter what you do and how well you do it, if you're not trying to go better, get bigger, do it more, you know, or do it better, then, you get comfortable and you either get bored or, somebody else will figure it out, that's for sure. And then they get the whale and you get a small fish maybe. So, but in the sport of racing, without the big dollars, you don't race. So it isn't a matter of being comfortable, it's a matter of becoming a spectator rather than, being an actual competitor. So my first story is how I got Ford Motor Company, because that was, as a racer, I was out racing a Ford Pinto, and then I moved up to a Cosworth Vega. It was my street car. I drove it back and forth to work during the week, and I raced it on weekends. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, so this was not like, oh, poor me. This was like, wow, I was just, really loving it. But I also realized that for me to get a real race car and to really become a real race car driver, I needed sponsors, and I thought the obvious sponsor was a car company, an automotive manufacturer, because they're in the business. So instead of trying to, just throw a dart at, or throw something up on the wall, and I threw a dart rather than just throwing enough stuff on the wall and say, somebody sponsor me, I became very strategic about it. And while I was in this process, I read an article in Car and Driver magazine, which probably not on all of your reading lists, but as an automotive person and as a racer, I read Car and Driver every month. When I got divorced, we had to fight over who got the Car and Drivers. But anyway, Car and Driver, there was a sidebar article about Ford Motor Company not only trying to sell cars successfully to women. Now, this is in 1978, okay? But that they were trying to provide equal employment opportunities for women in non-traditional areas. So my light bulb went off. And I thought, if I race Ford products and win on Sunday, they'll sell more cars on Monday. And as a female out there, it'll demonstrate to the world that Ford Motor Company is providing equal employment opportunities for women in a non-traditional area, in a male-dominated sport of racing. So it made total sense to me. It quoted 3 people in the article, so I wrote all 3 of them a letter, gave them my bio, and told them who I was, and told them my idea. And I got a letter back from one of them, carbon copying the other 2, and that's when I started to learn a little bit how the corporate world works. You don't have to go after everybody, you figure out who the right person is, and then they let everybody else know. That took, they said no, by the way, and so I got rejection, and then they always say don't take it personally. I'm like, no, it's just my life, my career, don't take it personally. But they said keep us informed of your progress. I also wrote then to Chevy and everybody, and to Chrysler. I wrote to everybody else because I figured if it was important to Ford, it would be important to the rest of them. And they all just said no, like go away. Where Ford said keep us informed of your progress. So it was a sense of timing that was, I wasn't there at the right time, but I had the right idea. And I pursued them. In fact, I drove them crazy, really. I would send them letters and copy. If I had a little mention in a newspaper or something in my racing, I'd send them that information. And in 1981, so 3 years later, after completely, being total pest with them, I was signed as a factory driver for Ford Motor Company when they announced a special vehicle operations division that was going to oversee racing. So when their timing was right, I got the deal. To me, the 2 lessons were do your research, be very specific and targeted, and Barb already mentioned this. And the other is the sense of timing, that just because you're getting rejected or because you're not getting the deal, you didn't get the yes, it doesn't mean it's a bad idea, it doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means maybe the time isn't right. And so, just continue to pursue, but be conscious of what the timing is. And persistence. That's the common one in all of mine. The next whale that I caught was JCPenney. Now, this one was really interesting because this is now 1991. I am on a pursuit of racing in the Indianapolis 500 after having victories at Daytona and Watkins Glen and Elkhart Lake, going to Le Mans, doing all this fabulous stuff, but hadn't done Indy, hadn't done Indy cars, and that was still hanging out there. Now, I'm still getting older every year, just like everybody else. And so anyway, I am on this pursuit. 1988, I drove an Indy car for the first time. It went really well. Dick Simon gave me the opportunity. At the end of that test, Dick Simon says, we can do this. He didn't say you can do this. He said we can do this. I love the word we. Michelle back there who works for me, every time I say, well, we can do this, of course that means she can do this. But anyway, I use that word a lot. Who's we? Well, it's all of us. So anyway, he said, we can do this. And that meant that he was in. And so, collaboration and, we can't do anything by ourselves. It takes a team. And determining, in my case, trying to drive a race car in an Indianapolis, you have to have a team. You can't just show up and say, I am the driver, I want to do this. You have to have a team. And a team owner that is willing to hire you or willing to employ you or willing to give you that shot. And Dick Simon made that commitment in 1988 when I drove the Indy car. 151 companies later, over 3 years, I got an audience with JCPenney. They were the 151st company. So when I talk about persistence, it's definitely, as I said, an underwriting lesson in anything I've accomplished. So, but how did I get to JCPenney? Well, this is where the whole networking thing, I think, where you have to really broaden your network. I was working with a public relation executive in Washington, D.C., who I met through working with Ford Motor Company. And he sort of took my ploy on about, trying to do what I was doing. And he was a great writer, and he helped me write some of my proposals. And he was getting tired of me calling him and asking him to write some more stuff because we were, 140 company, it was like, God, Lyn, how many times do I have to reinvent you, And so he introduced me to a friend of his that he said, I think she could be helpful. Her name was Sheila Plank, and she lived in Washington, D.C., and she was on the board or actually worked for United Way. And, I'm thinking, where's the connection here? Well, I met Sheila, and it was like meeting Dion. She was just so cool, and we just hit it off really well. We became great. I thought, well, be a great person to have as a friend, but she was all pretty and prissy and everything, And I'm like, she isn't going to have a clue what I'm talking about, which she didn't, but she said, there's somebody I think that you should meet, and her name is Carrie Roselle. This is Pete Roselle's wife, and I'm like, well, that's just pretty cool in itself. And so I fly to California to go to actually an LPGA, because they were playing out there. The LPGA was playing out there in San Diego, and that was the area that the Roselles lived in. Pete was now retired from the NFL. And we had lunch. Turns out that Carrie Roselle is on the board of JCPenney. She's on the board of United Way along with the chairman of JCPenney and many other corporations. Also turns out that her daughter worked for ESPN and watched me race at Le Mans and was this huge race fan. And she said to me, you can't get a sponsor? I can't believe this. She took this personally almost for her, and just was like, I can't believe this. And she said, I'm gonna get to work on this. She wrote a personal note, handwritten, to W.R. Howell, who was then the chairman of JCPenney, and said, I think you need to take a look at this. And then I got a note from her that said, you need to follow up with, and she wasn't W.R. Howell, it was another executive at JCPenney. So this is like, the the 7 degrees of separation and all this stuff. But this came out of, this was not a mainstream process of how if I had written to JCPenney from the outside in, it would have been like the other 150, I wouldn't have even got in to probably have the meeting. But because it came that way, and W.R. Howell didn't say, do this, he just said, we've been told to take a look at this. And so that opened the door for me to have a meeting. Well, even with that meeting, it took 5 months of follow-up and presentations and going in. It was still an amazing process before I actually sold the deal. And so the whole thing about not, you're all going to maybe talking to each other. We all have a tendency to talk to ourselves. We talk to people who are in the same business. We talk to people because instead of really reaching out, or thinking because you've spoken to somebody or met somebody, they don't know what I'm talking about. They don't know anything about what I do, but you don't know who they know or what, I met Adrienne, who's Corey Servas's granddaughter, and who I met when she was on the hosting committee for the Women's Sports Foundation to have their meeting here. If we had just sat and talked about dogs and things that we were talking about, that was great, but I didn't learn that. So, you just never know. So you really make every friendship, every contact, and now it's harder. It's easier with email or with all this electronic stuff, but it's also harder, I think, to a certain degree. But make every one of them valuable and count. Don't just so easily slough off. So broaden that network. You never know what it might return. The other part when JCPenney was, when I went in and pitched them, I spent more time educating them and learning to ask questions. I love this, because I went in and I had the Kmart car and the Amway car. I was trying to show them, hey, they're a retailer, so I was talking their business talk. So I went in all prepared to tell them this is just like you can be the Kmart car, except it'll be the JCPenney car. You put all your vendors on it, and you won't even cost you any money, and yada, 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 yada. And I did the same thing with the Amway car. I gave them the business models of their competitors and figured they're going to feed right into that. Well, it didn't work. I could tell things were kind of not, they didn't get all excited when I was telling them all this. So I decided it was time to maybe shut up and maybe ask a few questions. So I said, well, tell me the kind of promotions you do. And so through the course of that, they said, well, we have this slogan that we actually trademarked called Spirit of the American Woman. And we really, think it's great. And some of our, and we let all of our stores and our regions decide what they want to do with it. And we really lack a focus, a campaign or a focus to kind of put that Spirit of the American Woman on the map. So I thought, I immediately saw Spirit of the American Woman on the side of a race car. I immediately saw the month of May where the Spirit of the American Woman would just sort of really identify with JCPenney. And I saw job security, because I figured they can't put a guy in that car with a name called the Spirit of the American Woman. And so I turned it, from learning what they told me, I pitched it right back to them. The next time I went in, it was the car, the name of the car was called the JCPenney Spirit of the American Woman. And we didn't worry about getting all the vendors in. We still invited them, and we still had, that opportunity presented to itself. But I changed by listening, by asking questions and listening. I actually changed my whole, my whole pitch and my whole presentation to them. So sometimes I think we forget to ask and learn. The other was, it's not always what you think. Even after doing all of that, I was so proud and thought that's why they did it. In reality, after we won Rookie of the Year and did so well at Indy in 1992, I got invited to go back to JCPenney's when they moved. I don't know, it was a big deal in the retail business. They actually moved from New York City to Plano, Texas. And they just opened up their new campus. And I cut the ribbon by driving the race car through it, which was really cool, in Plano. And so I was thinking that, again, this was because it was the Spirit of the American Woman. And of course, it's a very conservative company. And I ended up, as I cut the corner, I actually drove over this guy's foot and didn't know it because, our tires are so wide, wide. And I didn't feel it, and then everybody said they took this guy to the hospital. I'm like, I guess I broke a couple toes or something. And I said, well, he should have gotten out of the way. But anyway, but all that went really well. And then I was actually asked to come in and speak to the W.R. Hull, who's still the chairman. He invited me to come in, and they had his top 100 managers sitting in this room. And they gave me a nice little plaque and, a nice little chat, and everything was good. And then I sat down. And he gets up there, and this was actually a business meeting, and he goes, okay, how many of you in this room have driven over 200 miles an hour? Now, he knows I'm sitting there, so I raised my hand, the only hand in the room. And he goes into this rampage about how you can't tell a book by its cover, because of the 100 managers, upper level management, not store managers, but management internally, 2 of them were women. So of their top level management, 2 women, 98 men, even though 60% of their store managers were females and 80% of their customers were females. It was not being reflected internally with their management. He was using this sponsorship of me as a platform for him to have a legacy to promote women in management levels at JCPenney. It had nothing to do with retail. It had nothing to do with vendors. It had nothing to do with driving traffic to stores and sales and all that kind of stuff. So even when you sell a deal sometimes, you find out that the reason why that maybe they made the purchase or made the deal is completely different than what you thought it was. And so we really kind of changed our role with that. The next, Lifetime Television for Women. I thought that would be a perfect sponsor because after this lesson I had with JCPenney was that I realized that I was having still a hard time to continue selling to female-oriented companies because we were in a male-dominated sport. I'm not talking about competitors. We're talking about the fan base. NASCAR has a pretty high fan base of females, but open wheel racing never has. It's been in the low 20%. So when I would go and pitch sponsors that were female products, or female service industries, they'd say, well, let's say if it's $1 million deal, but only 20% of the audience are females, does that mean we should only have to pay 20%? We'll give you $200,000 rather than $1 million, because we're only reaching 20% of our customers. Well, you know what, that actually made some sense. And so I thought, I got to fix that. And I can't make more women show up at the races, but what I can do is find a company that speaks to women and have them as a partner, because then we would be able to reach more women. Who cares whether they actually go to the race or not? The point is that we're communicating to them. I thought Lifetime Television for Women would be perfect. Well, I called Lifetime Television for Women. I did finally get to an executive there. It was she was like the head, I think, of public relations or communications and marketing and communications. I'll never forget this as long as I live. She goes, "We don't do sports." I'm like, hello, I'm a woman, I do watch Lifetime, and I hadn't noticed that they don't have any sports on it at that point. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was livid, you know. Well, fortunately, she went on maternity leave. No lie. I went back, and I ended up getting a meeting with the president of Lifetime Television. And how I got that meeting with the president is I found out that they hired a gal that was in charge of advertising had come from ESPN, and nobody had known that. And I found that Lyn Picard, and I found that out. And so she did sports, even though Lifetime wasn't doing any sports. She got the presentation, and this guy had just announced that they were doing the America Cubes, the all-women team in America's Cup. So he decided not only was Lifetime going to do sports, he said, Lifetime is about interesting women, interesting stories about interesting women. We're not about sports in the sense, we're not going to cover women's golf, or we're going to cover the people, you know, and that's what we want. And women who were competing in male-dominated fields, he felt were more interesting than women that compete just against women, I guess. So anyway, I ended up selling Lifetime Television for Women on that basis. So I mean, the lesson there is timing again, and quite frankly, trying to go as high up to the top as you can, and that's even with the case with JCPenney. I think sometimes we spend, instead of I could have spent my time arguing with that bitch who told me that, you know, Lifetime doesn't do sports, and trying to convince her she was wrong. And if she hadn't had maternity leave, I don't know, I'm not I don't know what would have handled differently. But I think that sometimes, you know, instead of beating your head against the wall, is to go higher up, or I don't know, go as high as you can go. I like going as high as you can go. The rest of it will fall into place. Okay, the last one, which is probably why I'm here, which is my last whale that I caught was Yellow Freight, which was my sponsor in my last Indy 500 in the year 2000. And that's how I met Barb. And actually, that's how I got Yellow Freight, was actually by meeting Barb first, who we met through another story where somebody, the 7 degrees of separation, somebody introduced us together because I was really trying to find the sponsor, and I was really running out of time. It was already into March, before May of that year, of the year 2000. So Barb and I met, had a great meeting, and then it was, oh, by the way, maybe you ought to meet my sister. I didn't know you had that time that you had 6 of them, but anyway, meet my sister, Valerie. She works for this company, Yellow Freight, and she's really on the fast track. And so we ended up meeting, and they were already involved in racing in NASCAR at that time. But we ended up, they said, well, it wasn't Valerie's decision, but she gave me the name of the guy who was the decision maker for their sports and their motorsports. And his name was Greg Reed. So I called Greg Reed, left a message and said, I understand that, you know, you may have some interest in race, you know, in having sponsorship at the Indianapolis 500. I know you're already doing a NASCAR program. You know, this is Lyn St. James and Dick Simon, and you know, we'd like to talk to you about it, but there's really a sense of urgency here because timing, we're running out of time. And he didn't call back, and he didn't call back. And I left a couple of other messages, and finally Dick says to me, you know, Lyn, we're really running out of time. I mean, he said, you know, what happens is without the sponsorship, and you've seen it if you live in this city enough, where somebody else replaces, you know, John Andretti replaced Jay Howard at Marty Roth. I mean, you know, and Sarah Fisher struggles, you know, I mean, it's just all happens right in front of us, you know, which means I wouldn't have been in the seat and somebody else would have. If Dick says, you know, he's got the car, he's entered it, but without the sponsorship, you don't get to ride it. So Dick and I are at the IRL office, and I'm like really mad because this guy hasn't called back. And so I call in Dick's in the office, I leave this message, and I like ripped this guy. I said, you know, if you said, or I was told you were interested in this program, and how in the heck can we talk about it if you don't call me back? And I mean, I just really let it rip. And I hung up and left a message, and Dick looked at me and he said, that guy is never going to call you back, and we are never going to get that sponsorship. I mean, you just treated him like he was 12 years old, you know, in that message. Like 5 minutes later, the phone rings, and this guy called back. And long story is, I mean, we got a meeting. We ended up having to go to Kansas City or the other, and yeah, what is it? Overland Park, where their offices were. And if you ever want to see an entertaining presentation of sponsorship, you go with Dick Simon, because the guy is amazing. But and we were able to get the sponsorship, and they were very proud of it. I mean, and the whole campaign there was, yes, she can, and yes, we did. So I guess the lesson there, back to the networking, is to be bold. I'm not proposing that you do what I did, but at the same time, be bold. You have to demonstrate intensity. You have to share that sense of timing that you may have that may not fit with somebody else's. Particularly in that case, it was a do or die situation, and approach it with confidence and that yes, you can. I mean, that turned out to be their campaign. Now, you know, they had some initiatives within the company, I think, of getting more women in the transportation industry, and again, and that was sort of but that was kind of there wasn't enough time to have a strategy. You know, but I think there was sort of like a byproduct of the whole thing. But I did come in with, you know, an amazing amount of confidence, an amazing amount of not cockiness, but just confidence, and I think they were able to capitalize on that. So, you know, overall, you've got to be specific, you've got to be strategic, and that's what I saw in the whale hunting. I mean, it was this whole thing. I loved it. I mean, you know, the fact that everybody on the team had different roles, and that it wasn't like they were just going fishing and putting a line out there. I mean, it was a case of, you know, and that understanding that the whole village, I mean, needed this to be able to survive for a whole year. And in most cases, even though the village wasn't as big as their village, it was certainly my career, and it was people that, you know, whether it was the team with Dick Simon and the other people that were engaged in my career. And then to be able to now feed other villagers, which, you know, I've been able to take this passion that I have for my sport, and realize that it wasn't about me. This was this PR person that I told you about in Washington, D.C. He taught me such an important lesson, besides the fact that he was a great writer and made me seem really important in words. You know, when I used to read this, I'm like, wow. But what he also taught me was that it wasn't about me. He said, Lyn, this is bigger than being about you. And this isn't just about being a woman in a male-dominated sport. All of us. Is the minute you let go of that and it not being about you, first of all, it gets more fun and more comfortable. And I realized that, you know, that it was bigger than me, that I was able to move the ball forward for my career, but I was impacting other people's lives. And then when I started getting fan mail from these young girls and men, guys, boys, whatever we call them, that they were asking advice. They didn't just want an autograph. And I couldn't just send them an autograph. And that's what then, you know, after working with the Women's Sports Foundation and having a role model and a business model as a not-for-profit, I found out that it's collaboration. Billie Jean King started the Women's Sports Foundation because it wasn't about Billie Jean King fixing tennis. She already did that. And I keep telling her, you already fixed tennis. Come help me with my sport. But she was trying to change. It was social change. She was changing the world, really, about how women were perceived. And it wasn't just beating Bobby Riggs. It was essentially getting equal pay for women in tennis. It was, you know, it was bigger than Billie Jean King. And so she got Donna DeVerona and all these other women athletes together. And I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it, because it was a fabulous experience. And we would lobby in Congress about Title IX, or we would be giving clinics about, you know, getting girls off the streets or off of drugs so that Nancy Lieberman could dribble, you know, the ball with them and everything. I mean, the only problem was that I found that I couldn't show up with a race car at a school and let them drive, you know. I mean, it was like my sport didn't quite fit the profile. But guess what? The profile worked. Because now, because of Title IX, moms and dads are now saying it's okay for our daughters to do what's always been okay for our sons to do. And now they're starting go-karts at the ages of 5 and 6. They're starting quarter midgets. They're doing soapbox derby. And they're winning. They aren't just doing it. They're winning. So I found I had this other power of being able to help these young girls and be able to train them. And obviously I'm very proud of the fact that Danica came to our program when she was 14, and that Sarah came to our program when she was 15, and that Melanie Troxel came to our program when she was 32, ready to quit because she was so tired of not getting deals that she thought her career was over, and I kicked her in the butt. We gave her some good training, and the next thing you know, she gets a deal, and now she's setting records and winning championships, and won the Women's Sports Foundation Sportswoman of the Year, the first race car driver to ever be elevated to that position. So it's just so cool to be able to get rid, to let go of it, of being about us, and being able to go out there and change the world, or change our lives and change the lives of other people, whether it's one at a time, or whether it's a collective group. So now I spend more time talking to moms and dads about letting their daughters be still kids while they're also trying to prepare them for their careers. So that's it.